Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, we are back at it again with some more Hiyuki pre-release materials, and this time the focus is going to be on none other than her signature weapon, Frostburn. And a lot of people are probably asking the question, knowing that they plan on pulling Hiyuki, is her weapon mandatory? Is it something that you need for her to function at all? Or is it something that maybe can be skipped, especially knowing that Hiyuki is a sword user, and of course, we all know how good and general Emerald of Genesis, the standard 5-star, is. So with that in mind, we got a lot of questions to answer, and of course, a lot of stats to look at. So let's go ahead and get ourselves started over here by just simply, oh, that's a little bit too early, simply taking a look at this bad boy. So I think most people can say that aesthetically, this is one of the most badass looking swords in the game. It is straight up a katana, right? And then it's got like the nice little like red motifs, all of that. I think a lot of people really like this thing, right? And so why don't we go ahead and just take a look at the base stats over here to begin the conversation. This is why, in my opinion, it's going to be good to wait on pulling this weapon. It's a very simple conversation. Because when you look at the base attack of 587 and the crit rate of 24.3, what becomes obvious over here, at least for this weapon, is that it has essentially the same exact stats as Emerald of Genesis itself. And so a really, really good decision that a lot of people can make before pulling Hiyuki's weapon is to just put an EOG on her, build around it, get good crit stats, all of that, knowing that you can just upgrade to Hiyuki's signature at a later point if you feel like you need that extra damage, right? That is what one of the big benefits are of this standard weapon. And with it sharing the exact same stats as Frostburn over here, at least on the base stats side, well, that means you can always just make the decision to build her on EOG first and then look for the upgrade if you need it. And that's one of like the nice little benefits, and I always make sure to call it out when a character does have this kind of additional bonus in their kit. Otherwise, just talking about the base stats as a whole, this has a nice round 587, so your attack percentage buffs, things like Rejuvenating Glow, Varina's buffs, so on and so forth, they should have a nice little effect. And then while 24.3% crit rate isn't as high as some of the other weapons in the game, well, it's pretty standard when your base attack is looking that good. So overall, I think it's good. I think it's shaping up to be a decent weapon so far. Nothing too crazy though, at least on the base stat side. Now, moving forward, we gotta take a look at the next section. And that's naturally going to be, well, the weapon skill. And this one is going to require us to do some additional investigation because it introduces some new mechanics that are going to require us to actually take a look at Hiyuki's kit to fully actualize the value over here. So, starting from the very top, this weapon has one effect. Attack is increased by 12%. That's just the baseline general attack bonus that it has. Some weapons give you a 12% general attribute damage bonus. This one's just going to give you attack. Very similar to a lot of other signatures in the game. The secondary effect is when the wielder applies Glacio Chafe, Glacio damage is amplified by 28%, and Resonance Liberation damage ignores 10% of the target's defense. So think about it this way. Hiyuki, with her kit and everything that she's capable of over here, applies Glacio Chafe on almost every single attack in her goddamn kit. Yeah, basically her intro skill does it, so you get this bonus at the start. Her basic attack 3, which you use right after her intro skill, also applies Glacio Chafe, and then like basically every fucking attack she has applies Glacio Chafe. So if that isn't obvious already, you'll have pretty much full uptime immediately on the first part of this effect. 28% glacial damage amplification is not a massive crazy amount, but I guess it's neat because it'll apply to all of the damage that Hiyuki has in her kit, being a glacial character. And then with Resonance Liberation damage ignoring 10% of the target's defense, I would say that's okay, but 10% defense ignore is almost like not noticeable. Almost not noticeable at all in most situations. So do keep that in mind. I wouldn't be looking at this part of the weapon effect and then deciding, oh boy, this is the most broken shit I've ever seen. I think it's more so this side over here, that 28% amp. You will notice though that there's very few actual percentage damage buffs that you're seeing over here, right? You're not seeing like a, oh, glacial damage increased by like 20%, or glacial damage increased by like 30%, right? Or really anything like, oh, liberation damage increases by like 30%. There's none of that in here. It's defense ignore and then 28% amplification, which Depending on your number of outro buffs, this could be feeling a little bit oversaturated. However, Hiyuki doesn't really seem to have, at least from what I'm seeing, unless you plan on using Lene in her team, Hiyuki's not really going to have that many sources of amplification in her teammates. So yeah, we'll just have to see what the Glacio Chafe support looks like. But think about a unit like Chisa, who is going to be Hiyuki's kind of like best in slot support. Chisa doesn't really give any amplification. So having 28% Glacio damage amp from her signature is actually very nice when your teammates don't give you any amp at all, and Chisa gives nothing. She instead reduces the enemy's defense. So that's where her bonuses come in. Now, though, we got to get into the spicy side of this weapon, and that's this effect over here. If the wielder is the active resonator in the team, they're the one that's on-fielded, Glacio Chafe damage dealt to all targets within a certain range is amplified by 20% for 6 seconds. And this effect can be triggered up to 1 time every 0.1 seconds, and only the strongest effect of the same name applies. I don't really know why all this extra shit is there at the end, because, like, it's not like Hiyuki can wield 2 fucking weapons, right, bro? And it requires her to be the active resonator, so, like, how the hell would you even get 2 applications up? You kind of see what I'm talking about over here. This just seems like a bunch of nonsense at the end over here. But this is essentially the effect. Glacio Chafe damage, which Hiyuki does a lot of, is going to get an additional 20% amplification. But this is where I'm going to get at least a little bit skeptical about how good this effect is. For this effect to be good, you essentially need to activate the 2 stacks of Snow Rust that you have from Hiyuki's inherent skill. And you can see how the stacks are gotten. When a resonator in the team applies Glacio Chafe or Havoc Bane, she gains 1 stack of Snow Rust. Her first stack, which she can get by herself, gives her 30% Glacio Chafe, Glacio Bite damage amplification. Glacio Chafe is Glacio Bite, and Glacio Bite is Glacio Chafe, just so you know. So she gains 30% amplification just from existing, and then, well, a crit damage buff of 40%. That's already better than the shit you're seeing on the signature. This is 20%, remember that. It's really not that much at all, if I'm frankly going to be real with you over here. It really doesn't seem that good. Then the second stack over here is where, if you don't have this second stack, her signature loses even more value. Let me explain to you why. When Hiyuki is the active resonator in the team, each time she applies Glacio Chafe, she additionally deals 102% Glacio Bite damage once. Hiyuki applies a fuck ton of Glacio Chafe. And to get this second stack of the buff, you need Chisa on your team. Or the unreleased Glacio Chafe sub DPS, which you can't get because they're not released in the game. You get what I'm talking about, right? Without this second effect, I feel like Hiyuki's signature is really not doing that much, right? Because by having that second effect, you're adding a whole nother source of damage to be amplified. But without it, you're kind of just adding 20% onto 30, which is good, I suppose, but she already has 30% amp by itself, and I'm not going to be out here pretending Glacio Bite damage is going to be anything crazy unless you have Chisa on the team, who's going to be able to increase the stack limit of Glacio Chafe and Glacio Bite and make the applications deal more damage. The more stacks you have, with Chisa increasing the stack limit, the more Glacio Bite does. And so without having Chisa, right, you're beginning to see your Glacio Bite damage won't really be there because A, you'll be missing the stack limit increase, and you're also going to be missing the second stack over here, which basically almost doubles the amount of Glacio Bite damage you're actually doing in the first place. So you're probably seeing where the conversation is going over here, right? This weapon, a significant part of its power budget is based off of you having Chisa on your team. Because if you don't, you're cutting so much of your Glacio Bite damage away, and you're also reducing the stack limit, which is going to cut away part of the damage too. So you can kind of see what's going on, right? There's quite a bit that you're losing out on unless you have another limited 5-star unit in the form of Chisa to accompany your Hiyuki. And so the value of this weapon is essentially tied to whether or not you have Chisa, and most importantly, whether or not you're putting Chisa in Hiyuki's team. But this is the thing. Hiyuki's probably going to have some other viable teams on her release. And one of those viable teams, at least in my opinion, is going to involve her running alongside Lene, who will be in Rupture mode, and Mornier. Kind of like the wheelchair team composition, but it's not going to be that wheelchairy, because what does Lene buff? liberation damage. She gives basically up to 40% liberation damage buff, or really liberation outro amp. And guess what damage type Hiyuki is? It's liberation damage. So she's likely going to function perfectly fine with a Lene Mornier. And if you do decide to use Lene and Mornier on Hiyuki's team, well then her signatures Glacio Chafe portion of it isn't really going to have that much of an impact, right? Isn't really going to have that much of a overall buff, and it can feel like you're, well, not really benefiting that much. Because then, essentially, all this weapon gives is 12% attack, with which EOG already does. Then you're going to get 28% Glacio damage amp when Lene gives straight up 40, and then 10% defense ignore, which is like kind of not even a real fucking stat. You can kind of see what's going on over here. And this will be my take when it comes to overall value and whether or not you should pull this signature, at least in regards to Hiyuki. This is my take. If you plan on pulling Chisa, or you already have Chisa, and you want to build Hiyuki's strongest possible team, then yes, you should go for Hiyuki's signature. However, if you plan on not pulling Chisa and you only want to play Hiyuki, right, maybe in a circumstance where she's with Lene and she's with Mornier, you should probably just try her out on EOG first and skip her signature for now, and then decide to pull it later if you want like that additional bonus over here. That's the take. Because in my opinion, EOG versus her sig, at least in the Lene Mornier team, should not be nearly as much of like a loss than not having her sig would be in the Chisa team. If you have the Chisa team, the full premium one, you're really gonna want Hiyuki's signature because you want as much of that additional amp as possible for the negative status damage, because Chisa's gonna make the negative status damage much higher. And if you don't have her, it's gonna be much lower. And this is the thing. With EOG being so readily available and sharing the same stat blend, right? Well, it would be kind of irresponsible to say, pull her signature in a team that isn't really dealing that much negative status damage, and that's the Lene Mornier team. You can kind of see where the decisions are going over here. You're looking for full premium, you want the negative status package, and you know, right, that by having Chisa, it looks like you're almost doubling the amount of negative status damage that you're dealing. Well, there you go. Who's the third teammate with Chisa at launch? It's Lene. Hiyuki's best overall team is probably going to be Chisa, Lene, and Hiyuki. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind. However, Lene's probably going to be replaced by somebody else in the near future, but that's actually going to be the best team on release for her. So yeah, that's what's going on over there. Lene is a bit overworked. And so naturally, right, we got to get into some other questions over here. EOG is clearly, like we've already seen, a very competitive alternative to her signature. What are some of the other options, though? And that's where we're going to be utilizing, right, some of the nice little galleries that we have over here. Everbright Polestar. No. Get this shit away. Get this shit away, because Hiyuki cannot inflict Tune Rupture Shifting or Fusion Burst, and so all it is a 12% attribute damage stat stick. Nah, that shit is not happening. Emerald Sentence. Hiyuki does not deal heavy attack damage, so yeah, good fucking luck. Defiers. You can kind of see why I skipped all three. If you're wondering why I skipped these three, then Seek God. Same circumstance over here. Hiyuki doesn't really deal basic attack damage, so this is like worse than EOG. Hiyuki doesn't really deal resonant skill damage, so this is kind of worse than EOG. You can kind of see what's going on over here, right? Not a lot of great options aside from EOG, but when EOG is the easiest one to get, you can't really complain that much. I do think this is actually her second best in slot, simply based off of the fact that none of the other 5 stars really seem to even slightly work with her. However, though, you got Feather's Edge. And, like, if you manage to get this thing to, like, R5, it, like, maybe is decent, but I feel like EOG is actually just better based off of the base stats alone. Yeah, because 412 attack is, like, not that much. However, like, maybe if you've got enough of, like, a stat blend, it could work out, but you're probably just going to want EOG instead. So, yeah, I mean, what else could I really say? With EOG being this good and Hiyuki being a sword user, you could kind of just go for this. Aesthetically, it also fits Hiyuki very well because she's like ice, right? And this is ice, and so it's nice. I'm gonna move on now. Now, though, you might be having another question. How good is this weapon on other users? And this will be the take. it is fucking unusable on anybody that isn't Hiyuki for one simple reason. All of its effects are based off of being able to apply Glacio Chafe. And Hiyuki is the only character in the game that can apply Glacio Chafe. So other than Hiyuki, the weapon is just a 12% attack stat stick that has these base stats. And so it is pretty much, in most situations, going to be worse than EOG because EOG gives that extra ER, which is way more helpful than like 6% attack. So yeah, don't pull this with the idea that it's going to be like a value add to your entire account, be reusable on like other characters, because there's not a single fucking unit in the game that will be able to use this as more than a stat stick other than Hiyuki. That's pretty much just what it is. And I'm glad that Kuro makes it easy for me to answer the question, because you know that shit can be answered immediately within just the first goddamn line. So yeah, not really too much of a discussion to have over there. I don't think anyone should be that confused. Now though, yeah, I mean, everyone knows that these are the upgrade materials from Lahai Roy, and that's what this thing is going to use. So now, time to, I guess, like, do a brief summary. My personal take is try the unit out on EOG first, and then see where it goes from there. With this thing having the same stat blend as EOG, you could just build around EOG when you pull Hiyuki, and then just kind of, like, decide to upgrade to this bad boy later on. And you won't lose anything at all because you don't need to, like, replace the forecast or anything like that. Second, this thing, a lot of its value is tied in its ability to amplify Glacio Chafe damage. And if you're not running a team that deals a lot of Glacio Chafe damage, like, I don't know, any team that doesn't have Chisa, then this weapon is inherently going to lose a lot of its value. But in a similar vein, if you have Chisa, to maximize Chisa's value and her ability to increase negative status stack limits and stuff like that, and also activate this second Snow Rust ability over here that gives a lot of extra damage, then you're going to want Chisa's signature, or you're going to want Hiyuki's signature because of its ability to amplify that damage coming in. And so it's kind of like this was a bit more of like a pay more weapon, like a very, like, not like a whaley weapon, but just a very premium weapon, where to get its full premium value, you need other premium stuff on the team too. So it's kind of like a win more, pay more sort of deal, but when weapons are like guaranteed in this game, it's not really that expensive. Just go with this mindset. If you win the 50-50 or you're already on guaranteed, the 3.3 update should give you so many fucking pulls that if you win the 50-50, you're basically guaranteed to get a character signature as well. There's almost no way that you don't unless you're like griefing somehow, and kind of like treat it that way, because chances are you're going to get this in like 65. But similarly, if you want Chisa too, then maybe that's going to get the conversation a little bit complicated. It's kind of just like, if you planned on pulling Hiyuki anyways, you were probably going to get her weapon too. But just know this is nothing like a Zani situation at all, and you're very eligible to likely skip this thing and still have Hiyuki teams that do very well and clear. That's why I'm saying wait. That's why I'm saying see how she performs without it first, so that you maybe don't end up in a situation where you realize later after the fact, I didn't actually need Hiyuki Sig, but I pulled it anyways, and now I can't pull another character. That sucks. That could be a situation you find yourself in. That's why I'm saying try her out on EOG first, and then go from there. And that'll probably be the process that leads to the least amount of regret on your account. Let me know what you all thought. Peace out.